In episode 4, we get a look through the eyes of King George on this one. He never wanted to marry. He wanted to focus on more important things, like farming, agriculture, giving his people cheap food. He didn't really care about the whole royal baby thing. But the princess told him that the war was draining their bank accounts. And when the American colonies threatened to withhold taxes, the people need a king, not a farmer. When the princess, though, does tell George that Charlotte is on her way, she's actually on a ship headed to London, he starts to have a breakdown. It's something that most of the people in the room have never seen from their king before, so the princess, who knows what to expect, quickly ushers them out of the room so they don't see any more of it. George's condition is something that they need to figure out quickly. The princess had hired a bunch of doctors, they had a bunch of theories, but none of them had actually cured him. There was one doctor, though, whose methods they hadn't tried yet. His name is Dr. Monroe, and he's from a psychiatric ward. He thinks this is mental, not physical. And while the other doctors dismiss him as a quack, the princess tells them, well, your methods haven't worked, so we're going to go with this guy. See if we can get the king right before his wedding day. Monroe is convinced that just by talking to George, he can cure George. And the early results are good. He talks to George, and George is able to snap out of the funk that he's in. George worked with Monroe for a week, and on his wedding day, when he heard that Charlotte had disappeared, he tried to do the same thing, run away, because it was clear to him that Charlotte didn't want this wedding any more than he did. He gets stopped, though, by Monroe, who slaps the crap out of him, something that no one's ever done to the king, and tells him to snap out of it. George then walks the grounds, found Charlotte, convinced her to stay, and the two got married. They were happy. At least for a few hours. That is until the big blow-up when he told Charlotte, you're going to stay here, I'm going to stay somewhere else. Once he did leave, he headed to the observatory and he told Reynolds, here's the problem with her. She's extremely clever. That's part of the reason why I can't hook up with her. If she were ugly, if she were dull, I might feel up to the task. Instead, I feel like I don't deserve her. That girl belongs as far from me as she can get. So it wasn't that King George didn't want to be with Charlotte. He desperately wanted to be with her. He felt like he wasn't worthy of being with Charlotte. That is why he stayed far away from her. This setup seemed to work for George at least, but he was surprised when she just showed up out of the blue one day to confront him about what exactly he was doing in their marriage. Because of this, he realized that if he were to continue and not be with Charlotte, he was going to drive the most beautiful thing he'd ever met away from him. So the next day, he called on Dr. Monroe and said, I need you to try any method you can to fix me. If it's experimental, we need to do it. And Monroe was more than happy to oblige. The drastic therapy that Monroe wanted to use on the king was to make him obedient, because he was so used to other people being at his beck and call that he had never suffered. He had never ate garbage food. He had never been assaulted. He was this prim and proper boy that always had his way. So Monroe wanted to break him, much like one would do with a puppy. Monroe would dunk the king's head in a bucket of ice until he was pretty close to passing out. He also used an electric chair on the guy. But after a few days, there were no results, and the king was getting restless. He asked Monroe, how much longer are we going to do this? Because if you keep at it, I'm not going to have a self to restore. And Monroe snaps back at him, this is called the terrific method. Terror is in the name. He uses the example of wolves in the Black Forest and how over time they had become tamed into tiny little dogs known as Pomeranians. And Monroe vows to do to the king what the Germans did to their wolves. So the king kept at it. But Reynolds was certainly concerned for his friend. Reynolds questions the doctor's methods, and George admits, I've questioned them too, but this is my only hope to ever be with her. And Reynolds reminds him, you're the king. You can be with her whenever you want. George, though, still thought that he wasn't safe enough to be with her. But he did think, well, maybe I can be near her. He would go and watch her from afar without her knowing. But he also wanted her to have something to keep her company. That's when he snuck down to Dr. Monroe's office and took one of those Pomeranians, gifting it to the queen, not realizing that the queen would hate that. The missing Pomeranian, though, is noticed by Monroe. And the next day, as Monroe is shaving the king, he says that he's pretty sure the king has a mole because one of his dogs was missing. He doesn't realize it was the king. And if he does realize it, he doesn't say anything. But it becomes abundantly clear that it was the king when Reynolds comes in and says, "Charlotte got your gift." She called it a deformed bunny, and the king just laughs at it. The king gets up and tells Monroe, "You know what? No ice bath, no chair today. I'm good." And Monroe tries to command the king to stay, but he's not a dog. He's not trained. And he says, "I'd rather work on my farm today." After doing this, he decided to go dine with Charlotte. And he thought Charlotte would be thrilled because he was spending time with her. He never expected her to be angry about it, but she was. That's the night where the king showed her the observatory and told her, "I'm moving in." That was something that Monroe did not agree with. He thought that such a drastic life change would do irreversible damage to the king's progression. But still, Monroe disagreed with the decision. Although there's nothing he could do. He's arguing with the king. Shortly after moving in, though, that's when his episodes started happening more frequently. It was like he was living two lives. He was hooking up with his wife quite a bit, but he was also going to visit Dr. Monroe for treatment. He did all this in secret because he never wanted Charlotte to learn about Dr. Monroe. He does, though, piss off Monroe when he gives credit to Charlotte, saying that her methods have done more for him than Monroe or his chair ever could. He's going to keep Monroe around, but he has no interest in getting back in that chair and continuing his methods because he's smitten with Charlotte. The night of the ball, the night where he kind of went crazy, he woke up in the middle of the night, headed down to the kitchen, and he was surprised because there was Monroe standing there. And the king had made it clear to Monroe that he was to stay in the basement. But Monroe was making a kind of concoction, and he tells the king, "I'm not making this for you. I'm making it for the queen. She found out that I was here, and she wanted my help. She wanted the doctor that the king was going to. And she wants my help because she's with child. So, congrats." And the news that he was going to finally be a father is the thing that really set him off. That's what made him go nuts that night. When he woke up the next day, he was naked, alone, and wondering what the hell happened to him. And I understand how that feels. It was my entire sophomore year of college. He was wondering where Charlotte went, and she went to go confront the princess about what exactly is going on with her son. There was a few things in the palace that she recognized and thought it was nothing but a coincidence. For example, when he moved in, all the knives suddenly were dull. The windows were locked. She just thought that it was nothing until last night when he was in the garden talking to the sky. That's when she realized these weren't coincidences. These were calculated plans to make sure the king didn't harm himself. Charlotte blames the princess for not letting her know, and the princess fights back, saying that Charlotte shouldn't be sitting there criticizing, having no idea what a mother goes through. And it won't be until she is a mother that she truly knows the struggle. They continue to go back and forth on why Augusta held this information from Charlotte. But they are unaware that King George is listening to the entire conversation from outside the door. And after hearing this, he heads down to the basement, finds Dr. Monroe, and sits back in the chair for more treatment. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.